Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the Institute ending for Fallout 4. So this is very much a spoiler-filled episode. If you have no interest in hearing about how the Institute ending went, or any of the things that I have done or did leading up to that, I would leave the room right now and come back at a later date. For those of you, though, let's start by talking about sort of the factions that I had to deal with, quote-unquote, in a mafia boss type way, in order to finish the ending for the Institute. And then we'll actually talk about the Institute and the reason that I ended up going with it. So, first and foremost, the footage you guys are seeing here is from my grand old, like, 2-hour battle with the Brotherhood of Steel. It was an absolute nightmare. The Brotherhood obviously had to go. They were very keen on eliminating the Institute, just, you know, through blind rage and some sort of misled sense of guidance that the Brotherhood always seems to have. It wasn't actually that difficult to go and then, like, eliminate them, murder them, use their own weapon against them. Liberty Prime, of course, seeing the return. It was actually fairly easy because I found them to be completely psychotic and insane. Elder Maxon is absolutely bonkers. Completely out of his mind. The fight itself was actually excessively frustrating on survival mode. It was very difficult. Chewing through power armor, despite all of my upgraded weapons, was an incredible challenge. I had to use a lot of ammunition. Yeah, it was rough. Like, I ended up using a lot. It tore through my personal power armor. I did have the opportunity to use some of the Minutemen's airstrikes, which was cool. That came in pretty beneficial as well. Kind of, not really. I usually miss with every single airstrike, I think, but overall, at the end of the day, I finished the fight. The Brotherhood is essentially destroyed. Not really. They still continue to roam the wasteland even after I've done this. I had Nick Valentine with me as my follower, and he definitely questioned what I had done. You know, how could you just destroy all of them? I know they're bad people, so on and so forth. I felt that statement from him was a little bit silly, considering just how insane and irrational the Brotherhood are. But at the same time, they haven't caused any direct harm to the people of the Commonwealth or the outside areas, so you can understand where he's coming from, you can understand where they're coming from. And Nick himself still saw the Institute as the boogeymen, the sort of bad guys. Which, again, I guess you could say is an understandable statement. I think the big problem here for me, and you're going to notice that the more as we start to talk about the Institute in just a moment, is that there's so many open ends to certain questions that I think are very important to allowing the player to fully understand the motives, the directive of any of the given factions. I'd say the Railroad was really straightforward, the Minutemen is very straightforward. But when it comes to the Brotherhood, like, you know, there's an understanding, but then there's sort of psychosis, their level of violence that kind of makes them feel like they are slightly misguided. But the Railroad, you know, very keen on, we want to save synths. You know, they have a right to be free, they are human beings. The Institute's argument against that is, no, we've created them. And for me personally, I ended up being very torn by this situation, despite really wanting to go with the Institute just for the sake of going with the Institute, and then later going on and finishing up the other stories. But for me, though, as someone who recently finished watching Star Trek, just a few months ago, watching Star Trek, of course, The Next Generation with Picard and Data, you know, I had this thing, you know, the same sense, the same, you know, feeling that I had about Data as a character. You know, Data, while he is a being that was created by humanity, and he's very much an android, he has all the same rights. You know, he exercises the same abilities and thought processes, including what seems to be free will, you know. Yes, he is very much directed by his directives given to him by his superiors, but the synths are kind of in the same place. So that was where I did seem to find an argument with the leader of the Institute. But that being said, you know, like I said, at least the Railroad has a very straightforward directive. And as we'll talk about in a second with the Institute, even after finishing this story, their directive never becomes very clear. At least the details of that directive never become very clear. The initial outline of it is, but, you know, you never really understand how they're going to do what they say they're going to do. So, the Institute, alright? First and foremost, you roll up into the Institute. Once you finally get there, you are forced to meet the Railroad as part of it, and to create a bond with the Railroad, one that I thought was very strong. I was pretty much guaranteed to go with the Railroad. This was before I realized there was even the option to side with the Institute. Once I had the option to side with the Institute, I wanted to do it just for the sake of seeing how it would end, because it was such an exotic last-second decision. Sadly, the Railroad was also one of the groups that I had to destroy in order to stay in the Institute. So they really give you, into the very last minute, the opportunity to align with the Institute or the Railroad. You know, it's up until that point where you decide to kill everyone on the Railroad that you end your, you know, sort of thing with them. You also have the opportunity to go ahead and start freeing the synths still. Even though you've done all this stuff for the Institute and they're about to make you the leader of the Institute and your son is about to pass away, you can still side with the Railroad and go against the Institute again, simply by freeing the synths. So I like that they gave you that last minute decision. And like I said, for me, I knew I was just going to go Institute because that was my plan. So, as I just mentioned, the person who runs the Institute, once you get inside, turns out to be your son. It turns out a lot more time has passed since he was taken from the vault right in front of your eyes as a child. In fact, 60 years has passed, not 5 years. The boy that you saw known as Sean, again, not a lot of clear answers on this. If he is some sort of a synth that also has the ability to grow, but he's sort of stuck in a containment facility. I know there are story options that would allow you to actually escape with him as your son. I was unable to gain access to those simply because I don't have high enough charisma, and of course we have no other options for actually pushing through dialogue. You know, we can't do strength, we can't do intelligence. So I ended up having to find out who my son actually was, continue through with that, and the kid is just pretty much left there. You never learn anything else about him, at least I did. I learned zero. Zip, nada, zilch. He's still there. Now that I'm the leader of the Institute, I know nothing about what is going on with him. It was very jarring to never find any more answers about him. Maybe if I had looked deeper, but the fact that they weren't more exposed and, you know, open to me just through basic dialogue seemed a bit silly. So of course you find out that the guy who's the owner of the Institute now is your son. They raised him, and he really stands for this cause. The cause, which is basically outlined as preserving humanity into the future, and that's it. There is never a connection made between the preservation of humanity by the Institute and the fact that how they're going to do that. You know, in your head you'd like to say, well, obviously they're going to create synths to replace humans. If that's the case, that's a pretty loose sense of preserving humanity, and again, they never really outline this. Eventually, you help them activate a nuclear core once again, which you can only imagine going very, very wrong. There's a very good reason we don't use nuclear power. It is excessively unstable, and the smallest of errors from their workers, including the man in Chernobyl who fell asleep, can cause massive worldwide destruction once again. It's just not, it's no bueno. Like, reactors, no good. But yet, you do it anyways. That's part of the quest. You get them back up and running, and you are soon elected well, not elected, given the position by your son as the leader of the Institute, and everyone follows in suit. You then have the option to go ahead and eliminate the Brotherhood how you see fit, and to start equipping synths either in larger numbers or with better weaponry. That's it. You're the leader of the Institute. Shortly after eliminating the Brotherhood, and then, you know, of course, making sure you dealt with the Railroad as well, you go back to find that your father is dead. He's dying. He's sick. You knew that he was sick. He ends up dying right in front of you, and that is the end of the game for the Institute. The only thing you have done between now and then is announce to the Commonwealth what the Institute is. You ask them not to intervene, and you basically make it known to all of your followers and companions that you are part of the Institute. So this, of course, does change how they interact and see fit with you. Now, I only had to kill one of my followers, and that was the dude from the Railroad, whose name I have simply forgotten. But that's how it ended, right? You know, there's the whole war never changes speech again, which I thought was a little bit trite and overdone. I mean, how many Fallouts is that going to be the motto for? You know, they're just going to use that to close out the game. And that's it. You're inside of the Institute, you can still do Radiant Quest. Of course, the Railroad is gone, the Brotherhood of Steel wants nothing to do with you, but they are still wandering about. And it leaves a lot of open room for expansion of the story through DLC or through sequels, which was something that I felt was a little bit odd. Fallout 3 and New Vegas kind of closed things up. Now, I'm not saying that I need an ending that completely wraps things up, but it just felt like it kind of stopped, like it just ended for me. I'm not disappointed by it, but it felt weird, and like I said, there was a lot of unanswered questions that I had regarding the Institute, and I don't think the game, through dialogue, did a good enough job of letting the player explore the full reasoning, the full motives behind each of the factions. As I said, some were better than others, some were clearer than others. The Institute was probably the least clear, and if I wasn't following through with that story just for the sake of seeing what happened, I would not have followed through with them because they just seemed very vague, very boogeyman, and the fact that I was now practically the director of the place and I still knew very, very little about what their so-called plans for the future were was absolutely ridiculous. And I was like, what the hell is this all about? When am I ever going to find out the answers here? You really plan on just hiding down here underground and using synths to like reap and ravage the land until supposedly the upside world goes insane? And that was probably the immediate disagreement that I had with Sean, with your son, when he talks about, you know, he goes up for the first time outside after you do a quest, again, to kind of fight against the railroad. And, you know, he says, oh, it's so terrible up here. And I'm somebody who very much is all for the fact that, you know, humanity has managed to prevail through a lot of effed up situations in real life even. You know, we've come out on top, we've come together when we've needed to most. And despite the bandits and, you know, all the terrible things in the wasteland, there are still people looking to come together to try and secure a future. You know, that doesn't need to be regulated by some sort of government, which is very much what the Institute was attempting to do. To say that they knew what was best, don't worry, we're all healthy and happy down here, and you're all up there in, you know, the sinkhole that is the leftovers of the world. Don't worry though, we'll take care of it. You know, this tiny little factions down here creating robots that we, you know, that we simply call machines, even though we continue to make them more intelligent and more advanced, but we hold back on giving them free will. We refuse to give them free will. You know, what are their motives? They just feel absolutely insane. They felt worse than the Brotherhood at the end of the day. You know, it's like all these loose ends just made them feel absolutely nuts, man. Like, talk about my son being brainwashed. There was at one point when I was doing the story early on, before I decided I was going to finish through with the Institute, just for the sake of it, where I killed him. I literally just straight out murdered him the next time we met up. I'm like, you are in the head, man. All of you, you're crazy. Like, you're just, you know, let's take scientists. Of course they're going to be happy once they realize they've got healthy place and real food to eat. They'll do whatever you want without you ever telling them the answers. And they're just going to creating freaking synths, man. They're going to create cursors to go murder people that they don't like and do whatever they feel. It's literally the government. Like, it's the government all over again. The same people who caused the, you know, the war, the destruction that destroyed the world in the first place. The Institute is that on a smaller scale. That's how I felt about them. And it was just absolutely just ridiculous. You know, I think there are times when, you know, a game can tell a story, or, you know, a book, movie, whatever. You know, a story can be told where you do feel like mankind doesn't deserve a second chance. Like, they've wasted that opportunity. You know, it's too late. You know, they have to deal with the way things are, and they have to cope with it, and something like the Institute may have been able to pull through, but they didn't give me enough reason to believe that sort of thing, right? There's so much good going on in the Commonwealth, so many people doing things to try and just make life like it was, to try and repair and rebuild. You know, Diamond City, I think, is a spectacular example of that. Even Good Neighbor. Yes, I know it's ran by a psychopathic mafia man, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to give themselves some place to live, some place to remember what they once were, and to bring that back. At least that's how I felt about it. So I feel like a lot of the outside factions and civilizations were very well established for that reason. And I thought it was absolutely hilarious how the Brotherhood, so tech-hoardy and just gun-blazing happy, was so dead set on eliminating, you know, the Institute with the little knowledge that they had of them. Everyone knew so little about the Institute, but the Brotherhood just seemed to be, like, so just hard set on they must die. We've seen what they do, they're kidnapping people. Like, that blind knowledge was enough for the Brotherhood to just be like, annihilate all of them. We're going to do whatever we can to just absolutely destroy them. And that was just, again, that also felt very, like, a lack of, you know, full motivation there. You know, they weren't giving the Brotherhood the answers because the player wasn't even getting the answers as to what was fully going on with the Institute. You were just sort of trick questioned, you know, and led on the entire time you're down there talking to Sean. And one of you guys actually mentioned in the comment section below, because you decided to go with the Institute when you heard that I was going with the Institute, that, you know, you felt using your son as the leader of the Institute was a cheap shot by Bethesda. I think it, you know, I did actually feel like that when I first found out that that was my son. I felt like Bethesda was just trying to pull me in so many directions with the story. Like, you're making everyone seem like the good guy. And maybe that's what they intended, you know, because that's probably what that's what they all believe. They all feel like they're doing the right thing. But And, you know, I feel like there's that sense of the reality that I wanted to kick in where the player can use their own personal, you know, opinion and decision-making to decide what they feel is right and what they feel is wrong. But at the end of the day, they all just felt like the right way to go. There was so little known about them. You had to, like, play through each of them, you know, much more in depth to figure that answer out. It was incredibly difficult, and the fact that they did use your son did seem like, well, of course now you're going to go at the Institute because it's your freaking son. There is that emotional attachment there. And it is a little bit rough. But, like I said, honestly, for me, while it was difficult, in another playthrough, I will meet him and I will shoot him straight in the friggin' face. And I will align with the railroad. I will save all of the poor synthetic people that have been created and then stolen of their free will. And I will help them escape to the wasteland. And I will destroy the Institute and most likely the Brotherhood of Steel. Because we don't need to heavily military-focused factions in a society that is attempting to rebuild. You know what? Let it be the Old West. Raiders, good guys, bad guys. Let things roll that way. But the last thing you need is a superpower like the Brotherhood of Steel, packing 50 tons worth of nuclear equipment, and a faction like the Institute with the ability to warp above and below ground at, you know, at whenever the hell they please and snatch people who they feel are going to help their cause and create nuclear reactors, and then who knows what else beyond that. It would not surprise me if the future plans of the Institute were simply to create a device that eliminated everything above ground, so then they could repopulate the Earth with, I don't even know what the hell they plan on repopulating it with. Synthetics? Like, again, you never ever find out what their actual plans are for the future to preserve humanity. Is it just to, you know, to mate with the people down below and then repopulate once the radiation wears off? Who knows how long that could take? Thousands of years, probably. It's just... the ending was a bit... It wasn't my favorite ending in a Bethesda game. And it had nothing to do, like I said, with it not being wrapped up. I'm okay with endings that just end. I loved the ending to Mass Effect 3. I didn't need any more answers. The things died and, you know, the cycle started again. We talked about this in the Pipcast. And now it's time to restart exploring space. That's just the way things had to be. That's the way the story was told. And, you know, I'm not at all for the idea of asking people to change their story simply because you don't like something. No. This is the story that was written for Fallout 4. It's a story that was, and we'll have to see where Bethesda decides to take it into the future. Whether it be with DLC or whether it be with sequels, who knows? You know, I would actually like to see now a continuation. Let's not start over again, you know, with another game. You know, let's talk about what happens next. Let's talk about, you know, where the player can go after this, what they can do to actually start making those changes, start bringing life back to humanity in a bigger way than has been captured in Fallout 4. But that's just wild hopes and dreams and speculation there. If you guys are watching this, there's a good chance that you went through with the Institute. I would very much like to hear your thoughts on all of it. Again, these were just my personal opinions. Very much a game that tried to pull at your emotional strings, right? And I think that everyone is going to be influenced and have an opinion that's influenced by how they were emotionally affected when playing through the end of the game with the Institute. So let me know your thoughts, guys. If you have any questions for me, things I didn't talk about, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. I would definitely like to hear where you guys think, you know, DLC could go based on where the story ended. You know, obviously they have 3, you know, different main factions to work with, 4 technically. So there's things that have to happen and, you know, change moving into the future, I think, for the DLC to make any sort of a direct connection to the story. Really, I just want to see them tell new ones. I've always liked what they've done with Fallout 3 and with New Vegas, how they just give us more, take us in different places, kind of let us forget about that. Like, there was a part of me that just was okay if I had never experienced the main story. I'll be completely honest. I was okay with just interacting with the characters in the world and dealing with each of their little problems. It's almost like I wanted to do fetch quests the whole entire time, because the fetch quests in Fallout are generally pretty freaking awesome. That's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you have a great week moving forward. There's definitely some awesome stuff that's going to be happening this week. The Division Alpha is going live on Wednesday. Hopefully that has no NDA, so I can check it out for you guys. Very excited with that. And of course, I think this Wednesday you can expect us to be talking even more about the Institute. You'll be hearing Kato's thoughts as well on the Pipcast. And I'm not 100% sure, but we might be doing a full spoiler cast on that as well. So look forward to it, and I will see you in the next one.